The barn light, we rented the farmhouse in Iowa, miles from the nearest town. Cornfields on every side, old red barn behind the house. Landlord said it wasn't used anymore. The place felt peaceful at first. Wind moving through crops softly, wood floors creaking occasionally, big porch facing the fields. Exactly what my parents wanted. Only one rule was mentioned: don't go into the barn at night. The landlord said it casually, like a safety warning. We didn't question it. First week passed normally. School bus came early mornings. Dad fixed a fence nearby. Mom unpacked dusty cabinets. I explored the property alone. The barn looked ancient. Tall sliding doors warped, roof sagging slightly inward. Rust covering the hinges, but the padlock looked new. I peeked through a crack. Inside smelled like hay rot. Broken tools scattered everywhere. A ladder leaning sideways, and darkness too thick inside. At dinner that evening, I asked why it was locked. Dad shrugged without concern. Probably unsafe structure, he said. Mom changed the subject quickly. That night, around midnight, I woke, needing water. House completely silent. Moonlight glowing through windows. Everything calm and still. Then I noticed something outside. A soft, yellow glow. Faint but steady. Coming from behind the house, from the direction of the barn. I thought Dad was outside, maybe checking something late. I watched through the kitchen window. The barn's upper window glowed. Like a lantern burning inside, the light moved slowly, crossing the small window once, then disappearing briefly, then returning again. Like someone pacing upstairs. Next morning, I mentioned it. Dad frowned in confusion. He hadn't gone outside. Mom looked uneasy, suddenly. Asked if I dreamed it. I hadn't. That night I stayed awake longer, watching the clock carefully, listening to the wind outside, waiting for the glow. At 12:18 a.m., the barn window lit again. Same faint yellow light, steady and unmistakable. Definitely not moonlight. I nudged my older brother. He groaned, but followed me. We peeked through the curtain, both seeing it clearly now, moving inside the barn. Probably a trespasser, he whispered nervously, or the landlord. But no truck headlights showed, no sound from the driveway. The light stopped suddenly, right in the center window, holding perfectly still, as if whoever held it was staring straight at us. My brother stepped back first, pulled the curtain shut fast. We didn't tell our parents, didn't want to cause trouble, but neither of us slept well. The following afternoon, Dad checked the barn lock, still sealed tight. No footprints in the dirt, no sign anyone entered. He laughed it off lightly. Reflection maybe, he said, but that evening he quietly pulled the blinds early and locked the back door twice. A few nights later, a storm rolled in hard, wind shaking the farmhouse walls, rain hammering the roof loudly, thunder cracking across fields. Power flickered once, then went completely out. House plunged into darkness. Mom lit candles quickly. Dad grabbed a flashlight. Through the kitchen window, past sheets of rain, we saw the barn clearly. Its upstairs window glowing again, brightest we'd ever seen. Not flickering like before, but shining, steady, and strong. Like electricity worked there, though our entire house was dark. Though the storm killed power, Dad muttered under his breath. Grabbed his coat slowly. Mom told him not to go. He hesitated only seconds, then stepped into the storm. We watched from the window, flashlight beam shaking slightly, rain soaking him instantly. He crossed the muddy yard, reached the barn door. He tugged the padlock. Still locked tight. He circled around slowly, flashlight sweeping boards, looking for another entrance. The upstairs light went out suddenly. Total darkness swallowed the barn. Only lightning lit it now. Dad froze in the yard, flashlight beam fixed upward. We couldn't see his face. Then the barn door opened inward slowly. padlock still hanging outside, still visibly locked in place. Yet the door moved anyway. Dad backed away fast, mud slipping under his boots. He ran toward the house, didn't look back once, burst inside soaking wet. He locked the door hard, hands shaking slightly. Mom asked what he saw. Dad just whispered quietly, "Nothing that should be there." We moved out 3 months later. Dad never explained fully, only said the barn wasn't part of the rental and shouldn't ever be opened. Years afterward, I searched the address online, found an old local article about that same farmhouse, dated decades earlier. It mentioned a farmer who lost power during a storm. Neighbors later reported seeing lantern light in the barn after the farmer was found dead inside. Upstairs, hanging from the rafters, with his lantern still lit. The old farmhouse in Kansas was the kind you see in pictures, with paint peeling from its white boards and a wraparound porch that sagged just a little. Behind it, a huge cornfield stretched out, touching the edge of the backyard. There were no fences, just an ocean of green and gold, meeting the grass where we lived. Dad loved the open land. He said the silence felt peaceful. Mom, she was more practical. She just liked the cheap rent. Me, I mostly stayed indoors. The field felt too close, even in the daylight. From my bedroom window, I had a perfect view. The corn rows stretched out to the horizon. Perfect, straight lines cutting through the landscape. By day, they were golden green and unmoving, almost hypnotic to stare at. That first week felt completely normal. At night, I'd hear the wind rustling softly through the leaves, the distant drone of a tractor, and the familiar creaks of the old house settling. Nothing felt out of the ordinary at all. Then one night, I woke up around 1 in the morning. The air in my room was strangely quiet. There was no wind this time, just an absolute, heavy silence that felt like a blanket had been thrown over the world. I glanced toward the window, and something felt wrong instantly. The corn seemed closer, not by a lot, just a few feet maybe, but it was definitely closer than it had been when I went to sleep. I rubbed my eyes, telling myself it was just my imagination. The moonlight can play tricks, distorting distances and creating shadows where there are none. I tried to reason with myself, convinced I was just tired, and eventually I went back to sleep. The next morning at breakfast, I mentioned it casually. "I think the corn moved last night," I said. Dad just chuckled. "Corn doesn't walk," he joked, ruffling my hair. Mom smiled, but I saw a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes before she looked away. That afternoon, while I was kicking a soccer ball around the yard, I made a point to check. The first row of corn started just past the small garden patch, about 20 feet from the back of the house. I memorized the distance, even counted my steps to be sure. It was exactly 21 big steps from the porch steps to the first stalk. I checked it twice, just to be certain. That night, I woke up again, startled awake by that same profound silence. The clock on my nightstand glowed 1:12 a.m. The moon was even brighter than the night before, casting a pale, silver light over everything. I forced myself to look out the window. My breath caught in my throat. The corn was closer again. This time it was undeniable. It was now only about 10 steps away from the house. The tall leaves were almost touching the edge of our manicured lawn. My chest tightened. I didn't dare open the window or step outside. I just stood there, watching the perfectly still rows. There was no wind, nothing to make them move. And then I saw it. One tall stalk, right in the front row, twitched. It didn't sway or bend like it would in a breeze. It just shifted sideways once, a quick, jerky motion, as if something invisible had just brushed past it. I yanked the curtains shut, my heart hammering against my ribs. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The morning sun felt like it took an eternity to arrive, but when it finally filled my room with light, I felt a wave of relief. I ran outside the moment I was dressed. The grass was still wet with dew. I paced out the distance again. This time, it was only 12 steps from the porch to the first stalk of corn. I yelled for Dad! He came out, a confused frown on his face. He measured the distance himself, walking the steps slowly, his frown deepening. He scratched his chin. "That's not right," he muttered, more to himself than to me. He tried to explain it away. "Maybe the soil was settling," he suggested. "Maybe we just misremembered where the edge was. Maybe the perspective from the window was just off." But I knew what I saw, and I think, deep down, he was starting to believe it too. That evening, he parked his truck in the backyard, facing the field. "Just to keep an eye on things," he told Mom in a quiet voice. They left the porch light on all night, and I saw Dad go out to check the yard twice before he finally came in for good. Everything looked normal. At 2:03 a.m., the truck alarm blared to life, a deafening shriek that ripped through the silence. I jolted awake instantly. I heard Dad's heavy footsteps as he rushed downstairs and out the back door. I ran to my window and watched. The truck's headlights were flashing wildly, the horn echoing across the dark fields. Dad approached it cautiously, his body silhouetted against the strobing lights. And then, as he got close, the alarm just stopped. The silence that followed was heavier than ever. He stood frozen for a long moment, not looking at the truck, but at the corn. I followed his gaze, and my stomach dropped. The cornfield now stood right at the edge of the porch. The tall stalks were brushing against the wooden railing, their long, dry leaves scraping softly against the wood. They had crossed an impossible distance in just a few hours. Dad started backing away slowly, never turning his back on the field. He fumbled for the doorknob, stepped inside quickly, and I heard the heavy thud of the deadbolt sliding into place. None of us slept again that night. We just watched from the windows. The yellow glow of the porch light illuminated the first few rows, keeping the deepest shadows at bay. The corn stood perfectly still, an impenetrable wall surrounding our home. Around Trescombe, a soft rustling began. It wasn't the sound of wind, and it wasn't small animals scurrying. It was something heavier, moving within the dense stalks. We watched as the rows parted slightly, creating dark gaps that would form for a moment before closing again, as if something large was walking slowly between them, making its way through the field. Mom's voice was a shaky whisper. "Call the police." Dad picked up the phone, his hand trembling as he started to dial, but he froze. He was listening intently. And then I heard it too. Footsteps on the porch. Heavy, deliberate. The old wood creaked under a weight that didn't belong there. They stopped right outside the front door. We all stared at the door, at the space beneath it. But there was no shadow. The doorknob rattled once. A slow, gentle turn, as if it was testing the lock. Then it stopped. Silence pressed in on us again. Through the side window, I saw the corn begin to shift, not blowing in a non-existent wind, but sliding. The entire field was moving backward, one row at a time, as if it was retreating. It was as if whatever, or whoever, had come to our door was now walking back into the field, and taking the whole field with them. By sunrise, the yard was clear. The corn was back in its original position, about 20 steps away, as if nothing had ever happened. That day, Dad installed massive floodlights, the kind they use for construction sites, and aimed them directly at the field. We left them on all night. For 2 nights, nothing moved. The field stayed put. We almost started to relax, to believe it was over. But on the 3rd morning, Dad found something in the yard. In the soft soil near the edge of the field, there were deep footprints. They weren't animal prints, and they weren't exactly human either. They started deep within the corn, came in a straight line right to our front porch, stopped at the door, and then turned around and went straight back, vanishing into the rows. Each print was filled with dark, muddy water, and pressed clearly in the center of each muddy footprint was the unmistakable shape of a bare human foot, but one far too large to belong to anyone we knew. We never found out who they belonged to, but we moved out the very next day. The door under the kitchen, the Missouri farmhouse, looked ordinary. 2 stories, wide kitchen, old wooden cabinets, basement listed as unfinished storage. Mom loved the kitchen most. Big center table, window over the sink, warm yellow light at night. It felt like the safest room. The basement stairs sat nearby, narrow wooden steps downward. Light switch at the top, concrete floor below. Always smelled slightly damp. We rarely went down there, only for laundry sometimes. Dad stored tools along one wall, boxers stacked in corners. Nothing unusual at first. About a month later, Mom noticed a draft. Cold air across the floor, right under the kitchen rug. Strong enough to feel barefoot. Dad checked the windows. All sealed tight. Checked the basement vents. Nothing broken anywhere. But the cold spots stayed. One afternoon, while sweeping the kitchen, Mom moved the rug aside. Underneath was wooden flooring. One plank looked slightly raised. Dad pried it carefully. The board lifted easily, revealing a small metal ring hidden flush in the floor, like a trapdoor handle. We stared silently. The house listing never mentioned any floor hatch upstairs. Dad pulled the ring slowly. Wood creaked open. A square hatch lifted upward. Darkness beneath immediately. Cold air rushing out stronger. Smell of earth and mildew, and something older underneath. A narrow ladder descended below, not into the normal basement. This space looked deeper, rough dirt walls visible. Too small for storage. Dad grabbed a flashlight. Mom told him not to. He hesitated briefly, then climbed down slowly. Light beam shaking slightly. We heard his boots land. Soft thud in the dark. Flashlight sweeping quietly. Silence for several seconds. Then Dad whispered, "There's a room down here." He sounded confused. Not scared, yet hoosed, uncertain, like discovering a crawl space. Mom leaned closer nervously. "What kind of room?" Dad didn't answer immediately. Flashlight beam shifting below. Then, softly, he said, "There's a chair. Just one chair. Pause. And chains on the wall." Mom stepped back instantly. Face pale now, Dad climbed up fast, closed the hatch halfway, didn't seal it fully. Just stared at the opening, thinking hard. "That's not on any plan," he muttered quietly. "No reason for that room." Mom insisted we seal it. Forget we saw anything. Dad agreed reluctantly. Placed the board back, covered it with the rug. But that night, none of us felt comfortable. Around 2 a.m., a dull thump woke me. From somewhere below, not loud, but heavy and deliberate. Another thump followed slowly, then a faint dragging sound, like metal scraping dirt, directly under the kitchen. From the hidden room, I crept to the hallway, saw Dad already awake, standing near the kitchen doorway, listening in total silence. Another scrape echoed upward. Mom whispered shakily, "Tell me that's pipes." Dad didn't answer, because we all heard it clearly. Chains rattling softly below. The kitchen floor vibrated slightly, very faint movement, like someone shifting weight on the dirt ceiling beneath. Trying to stand up, Dad slowly pulled the rug, lifted the hatch again. Cold air stronger than before, flashlight beam cutting down. The ladder waited silently, no movement visible. No sound now, just the dirt room below. Chair still in the center, chains hanging from the wall. Then the flashlight flickered once. In that brief dim second, Dad sucked in breath sharply. "What?" Mom whispered. Dad didn't answer. He steadied the light again. Now, pointing at the chair, I leaned closer carefully. Something looked different. Something definitely changed. The chair faced the ladder now. Before, Dad swore it faced the wall. He was certain of it, but now it pointed upward. Directly at Hoss, a safe waiting for someone to climb down. The chain on the wall swayed slightly, not from wind, not from movement nearby, just a slow side-to-side swing. Like recently disturbed, Dad slammed the hatch shut, locked a toolbox on top. Didn't say another word. We all returned to our rooms. But sleep never came. At 3:11 a.m., a loud knock hit the hatch from underneath the floor. Once. "Hard enough to shake dishes!" Mom screamed softly. Dad grabbed the phone. Another knock followed slower, then a third one. Measured and patient, then silence returned. Long, heavy, listening silence. From beneath the kitchen, waiting for us to respond. We moved out 2 weeks later. Dad never opened the hatch again. Landlord acted surprised about it, claimed no knowledge at all. Said the basement was standard. Years later, I found county records online. Original farmhouse built 1924. Owner listed as missing, disappeared without explanation. One note mentioned suspicion. Neighbors reported hearing noises from beneath the kitchen at night, like someone knocking upward long after the owner vanished.